This time on Rad Rat Video, we figure out what happened to Seek Skateboards. Let's get started. Welcome to Rad Rat Video. Here on this channel, you can learn all kinds of stuff about skateboarding. 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we talk about trick histories, game reviews, we talk about your favorite old pros, we learn tricks on the shred school, and we also learn about some old companies on this new series. I haven't named it yet in real time, but there's the name right there that I came up with. This series is going to be about looking back at companies that have died out and talking about what happened to them and remembering how cool or how uncool they were. And this is the inaugural episode of that, where we're talking about Seek. So Seek Skateboards started in 2002, and it was started by Rob Dyrdek and Josh Callis. So what happened was there was the main team at Alien Workshop, and they had split off into Habitat already. Maybe I'll talk about them some other time. But then Heath Kirchart and Steve Bear had joined Workshop. And it was starting to get really big. They were worried that there were too many pros and people were going to be overlooked, or that there wasn't a solid direction for the company with so many different kinds of skaters on it. So what they wanted to do was branch off and start Seek as a third company in this whole family of skateboard brands. And the idea behind that has a lot of benefits. So for example, if all 3 companies were one giant team, they'd put out a 3-hour skate video every few years. But if it's 3 separate teams, they all have separate videos. They come out at a more regular time period. They also have the ability to market to different crowds. So maybe this brand is more kid-friendly with the graphics and the way that they do all their ads and stuff. Maybe this one is more artistic. Maybe this one is more inspired by this or that. They have just different opportunities to market to different directions, and that would be one big benefit as well. But what was the point of Seek? Where did that fit in? There's actually a couple of different answers, and it kind of foreshadows what eventually goes wrong. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes for you. First is from Rob Dyrdek, and he says, "I consider it the dope section of the Alien Workshop sect. Me and Callis are a little more extended than everyone else on the sect, a little more hip-hop influenced." Not sure what he means by extended, but his point is Seek is the hip-hop version of Alien Workshop, but no one else seems to agree with him, because Josh Callis, the co-founder, he has a different story. He says, "Seek happened because we wanted to do a world company where it was like riders on the team, but it wasn't like he rides for the Euro team." So in other words, it wasn't the international team for Alien Workshop. It was a brand that happened to be international from the ground up. So was it international? Was it the hip-hop version of the brand? Actually, there is a third quote I want to read for you, and this is from Chris Carter, who is the owner of DNA Distribution. He says, "It's hard to pigeonhole Seek into one thing. They don't want it to look like Alien Workshop or Habitat, but certainly their direction is being influenced by Alien Workshop, which is a good thing." So it's very unclear what the direction was from the start, and that can be a real problem. So they didn't have a solid idea of what their branding was going to be. They didn't have a certain market that they were going for. Was it supposed to be, European and all this kind of stuff, or was it American hip-hop type of stuff? They weren't sure which direction they were going to go. And one of the big problems with having 3 different brands, especially if they don't have obvious directions to them, is having to do all these different ads, do all the different graphics, have them all have their own look and feel. But when you don't have a solid direction for that, that can be really tough. So Dyrdek was talking about it being hip-hop influenced and everything, but I try to figure out exactly in what way that was true. And one thing that their boards were known for was having like a metallic silver rim around it, and had a lot of metallic types of graphics and things like that, which were cool. I don't know if that's necessarily hip-hop inspired, but look at some of these graphics. So they were really into Badminton and Puke, which is really weird to me. I mean, they're well done and they look kind of cool, but how does that fit either international or hip-hop? I'm not really sure. Also, their graphic design in general was a little bit weak, so I have an ad that they made right here, and I used this to try to figure out who was on their team at the time, but you can barely even read this. So let's look at it. The Seek 7, Rob Dyrdek, Mike wait, Mike Taylor, okay, Josh Callis, Colin McKay, Flo Alex. Like it's a mess. It's really hard to tell exactly what they're trying to go for here. It doesn't have a solid direction. I like their logo, but aside from that, they had a lot of issues with their branding and things like that. But let's talk about the name at least. So where does Seek come from? There's a really confusing Dyrdek quote about that as well. But I think what the point was that it was more about seeking the truth. So related to the alien workshop. So you're trying to seek the truth about aliens, or you're trying to seek out life on other planets, something like that. Just kind of a feel that would kind of go with it without being too similar. And I think that's pretty cool, and I do like the name, but it is a little bit generic too. But what about the team? You had Rob Dyrdek, Josh Callis, Mike Taylor, and Colin McKay. Those are the big names that you would probably know, but there were a few more that I want to introduce you to in case you haven't heard of them. First is Alex Carlino. So he is from Brazil, and he had this really clean style. I'll show you some footage of him right here. There's not that much footage of him out there that I've been able to see, but he did have a few video parts. The second guy is Florentine Marv, who's a French, and he has some really sick footage out there. Seek actually turned him pro, which you can see in this ad right here that he did have a pro model. Last up is Greg Myers, who was a kid at the time. He was from California. He was on DC with Dyrdek, Callis, and McKay, so they just kind of brought him along, it seems like. They also picked up Bjorn Johnston along the way as an AM from New Zealand, but they picked him up pretty soon before they closed, unfortunately for him. So they had a really solid team put together, but they weren't really taking off. They weren't really getting the market share that they were hoping for. There are a lot of quotes about how they weren't a household name yet, but they're going to get there. I have a quote from Rob Dyrdek right here. He said, "Seek is headed straight to the top. It's taken a year to really define itself and become its own entity. Now it's just a matter of when we put out our video. It'll really add the true definition of being a top brand from DNA distribution." So since they were kind of failing to get a lot of market share at the beginning there, they were about to put out a video. And at the time especially, that was a great way to really build up your fan base and get things going in that kind of way. And if you look back on their site on the Wayback Machine, you'll see March 2004, they were talking about the video called As Is, which was going to come out soon. They had just returned from a filming trip in Barcelona, but unfortunately before that ever came out, Seek closed down in early 2005. Talking about what happened then, Josh Callis said they just deaded it overnight. They wouldn't bring Flo and Alex back on board with us, which was another thing that pissed me off, and they just wouldn't do anything. They were just like, no, we're over it. We were like, hey, well, wait till the video comes out and see what happens, and they just deaded it. So you think that the plus side of having this whole family of DNA distribution with their 3 different brands is that everyone would have a place, even if they had to close on one brand. That doesn't mean that they have to let go of all the skaters and all that, but it doesn't really seem like that's what happened. Josh Callis, Rob Dyrdek, and Mike Taylor all made their way back to Alien Workshop, like you might expect. Colin McKay actually hooked up with Danny Way, and they started Plan B around that time, a little bit after. So at the time, there was a rumor that they had done that before Seek closed, and that's what caused Seek to close. That doesn't seem to be the case. But there's another rumor that said that the hearing about that rumor is what made them branch off in the first place. It's kind of a murky story. Maybe I'll be able to dig into that a little bit more when I talk about Plan B in the future. So Carlino got shuffled away onto Habitat's international team, and Bjorn was on the Alien international team, and Myers was on Flow for Mystery or something, I guess. But what about Flo Marfang, the guy that they just turned pro? What happened to him? It kind of seems like they wanted to just shuffle him off onto the Alien Workshop international team. And that kind of sucks because he was pro for an international skateboard brand based in the US, and the next thing you know, they just want to flow him boards and maybe go visit him on tour every now and then. Huge step down, and it really sucks that he ended up in that position. Luckily, he ended up on Santa Cruz instead. But one thing that's interesting is that he's talked about moving to the US for Santa Cruz. And they said, no, why don't you just stay there and you'll be our connection to that area. And so it makes me think that he would have been willing to move to the US, most likely, but he wasn't given that opportunity. I don't know exactly how it went down, but it kind of seems like they screwed him over. But why did Seek shut down? So you hear about brands shutting down all the time. Usually it's bad sales. Sometimes a distributor goes out of business themselves, stuff like that. And maybe bad sales were part of it. But the actual reason that I found was actually really weird, something I never heard of before. So let me just quote Josh Callis. The story I got told was that there weren't enough graphics people and they weren't able to spend enough time on the company, so they just deaded it. Wow. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, having 3 separate brands can be a real problem, especially when you don't have clear direction on what they're all supposed to do. But you could fix that. You could hire some more designers, or you could shut down the whole company. And it looks like they went for the shutting down the company route, which is pretty crazy, especially because Callis said that everyone was caught off guard and they had no idea, which is a little bit weird to me because I was going through the SeekSkateboards.com archives and they hadn't posted anything since August 2004. Then they went out of business. I think the official announcement was in April 2005. So there was quite a bit of time there where it seemed like nothing was going on with the company. Maybe in retrospect, it was obvious there were problems, but in the moment, it seemed like it just kind of happened. So it really sucks that that's how it worked out. And there are also rumors that because Seek shut down, that put DNA distribution in general in a lot of debt because they overextended themselves to make this international brand, and that eventually led to them being bought out by Burton in 2008. I'm not sure how true any of that is. It's not like this knowledge is public and I can look it up, but there are rumors that that was the case. And then later, after Burton had him for a couple years, Rob Dyrdek bought DNA back in 2012. Seems like things kind of went bad. They were out of business for a little while. They had a big farewell party and all this kind of stuff, but then they came back for a little while. Now Rob Dyrdek's not involved at all anymore. Maybe I'll get into Alien Workshop proper a little bit more in the future, but don't expect to see Seek coming back anytime soon. So that is the story of Seek. Let me know what other defunct brands you want to hear more about below. But until next time, here are some more videos you might want to check out. Don't forget to subscribe so you can learn more about skateboarding 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And thank you for watching.